1. Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending today's webinar, Unified Platform Defined, presented by Medidata. I'm Donnie McDermott, and I'll be moderating this webinar. Our speaker today is Jeff Ventimiglia, Vice President, Product Enablement and Operations at Medidata. You can read his full bio on the left side of your window by selecting the profile button on the bottom of your screen. Just a few technical notes before we begin. The webcast is being streamed through your computer, so there is no dial-in number. For the best audio quality, please make sure your volume is up. The webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand within 24 hours after the event. Time permitting, we'll follow the presentations with a Q&A session. Please submit your questions using the Questions and Answers tab on the left side of your screen. Okay, now let's begin. Jeff, please go ahead.
Hi. So as Donnie has said, my name is Jeff Ventimiglia. I am the Vice President of Product Enablement and Operations here at Medidata. And what that means is it's my role to make sure that all of our products and applications are on our unified platform. My background is in platform development and clinical research. I spent many years working on the shared investigator platform with Transcelerate, as well as working on IQVIA's platform, Impresario. My focus today is really going to be explaining what we see as the market issues that are leading us to developing a unified platform, and then what it means to us to be on a unified platform. But let's start with the experience and really why we're going in this direction. I think many of you probably have already seen all of these stats before, but we really know that trials are becoming very, very complex. We are seeing increased number of sites, increased numbers of procedures, increased number of endpoints. We have protocol changes that happen up to 6 times through the clinical trial. And so we're really seeing this complex change through protocols. The interesting thing about this is you are not seeing the same change within the number of patients being enrolled in clinical trials. So what that really means to us is that most of our companies, whether that is a sponsor company or a CRO, are working on more smaller trials, which makes it even more difficult to connect the lines between the individuals working on that trial, as well as connecting the lines across trials about what's going on inside your company. So that's really what we started thinking about. When we started thinking about what was the problem, what was happening, it became very clear to us that there were broken links between each of the major components of clinical research. If you look at study planning, we have clinical scientists and we have medical physicians who are working on developing protocols, who are thinking about the design of the study. When that's completed, we're doing a complete pass-off, the study startup. We're trying to implement those designs and those procedures into selecting sites, enrolling patients, and really bringing the study online, whether that's within the United States or globally. And then once we've done that, once we have our FPI and we continue through enrollment, we're then passing the ball again into study conduct. So now we're really thinking about providing drug, tracking the patient, recording visits, and really going through the day-to-day of the study conduct. And again, we now hit that point, last patient, last visit, and we're throwing the ball over the fence once again to go into study closeout. Now we're in database lock. We've handed everything over to the data managers who are doing the cleanup and the biostatistics on that. And then finally, we hand a package over to scientific insights or regulatory to be able to condense all that down and make sure that we have a process and a flow to submit those to the regulatory agencies. When you really think about, everything I said and everything I did, there are something like 25 plus different workflows that go into clinical research. And if you look at our next slide here, what we see is that causes a major problem from a technology standpoint, right? Every time that we want to introduce a new system or a new process, we are diminishing our returns, right? We implement one system, solves one problem, we find out we have another problem, we implement a new system, our return is not the same, right? So we keep kind of going out and trying to solve each problem individually, and we're not reaching the total output of what we're trying to achieve. So these are all of the things that we thought about. Here at Medidata, we employ a lot of former and current clinical research staff who have dealt with this on a day-to-day basis. And really what we want to do now is we want to focus on being an innovator in this space and making sure that we are out there leading, right? We have heard from the FDA, we have heard from the different sponsor and CRO organizations about this need to make a digital transformation, the need for us to define leadership. And we need to work together on that, right? So we all need to think about how we go in and we implement technology, how we change processes, and we really make the day-to-day activity of your, mine, and everyone's staff easier. And we are truly looking to be a leader in that area. So we'll kind of talk about what are the components of what it means to be a leader and what we're trying to build. So when we look at the unified platform here, we think about some of the benefits for our three major groups. We have the people, which is you. Many of you sitting on the phone use some sort of e-clinical system every day, right? And if I am guessing correctly, it's most likely that you use more than one. So you have the opportunity to hop in and out of systems all day long. You may be in your office, you may be at home, you may be on an airplane or in a hotel. What we are really focused on here is providing you easy access into your systems and easy collaboration between your colleagues, whether that's a direct colleague in your own function or if it's a colleague across functional lines within your organization. The next benefit that we're really focusing on here is the data aspect of this. For many years, as long as many of us can remember, we have either been manually passing information from one group to the other, or we've been creating integration through APIs where we are putting data in a database, lifting it, moving it to another database, and setting it there. And when we talk about unifying a platform, that's the definition we really need to think about, right? The integration is the movement of data and putting it in multiple places. The unification is really the underlying data store that allows us to take data from all sources and keep it in one place, which is going to allow you to use that single piece of data in multiple places. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple minutes here. And then finally, the most important part, I think, for all of you on the phone is the process, right? So how does technology enable you to do your jobs? I've always been a believer that process leads technology, and we should work together on both the process and the tech to find the best way to conduct clinical research. So we think about you all every day here at Medidata when we think about how are we developing the system for you to walk through those workflows that we discussed on the slide before. So if you think about this, you know, what we're trying to do ultimately is change that paradigm, right? As you know, we talked about diminishing returns, we talked about stacked systems. Again, I know you all deal with this. I know if you've ever been to a clinical research site, you have most likely seen a research nurse or a nurse coordinator with a piece of paper hanging from their desk that says every one of their username and password for 9 to 10 systems per study, probably across 4 to 5 studies. And what we're trying to do is get rid of all of those systems, get rid of that stack, get rid of all those passwords, and really allow for you to exponentially grow and maximize your return on your investment, maximize your efficiencies by taking away all of the disparate systems and allowing you to run all of those processes through one individual platform. And so when we think about building a platform and we think about the core components, what we're going to spend the rest of our time on today is really talking through these core tenets. So let's walk through them each one, and then we'll dive into each one in a little bit more over the next few slides. So we think about interoperability as being probably the most core of what we're doing. Interoperability can mean a lot of things, but what we're really thinking about here is A, that we connect system to system within our own environment. So that means that we have a CTMS, we have EDC, we have eTMF that all are connected to each other and are able to share information in a way that is seamless and easy to use. But interoperability does not just end there. Interoperability means that we have to connect everywhere in your ecosystem. We recognize and understand that you use multiple systems, right? We can't be unrealistic and think that everything will always be metadata in the platform. You have to use systems across multiple vendors, homegrown, whatever it may be. So we've also got to think about all of the APIs and the interoperability that's built into our platform to you to connect to those clinical systems that you are using. The next thing that we really want to focus on is collaboration, right? I think that even to this day, the silos in between groups, even within studies, is a huge hurdle. I spoke about it earlier when we discussed the different components of the study and thinking about all the times that we're passing the ball over the fence. And what we're trying to do here is really break down those silos and allow for you to work with each other within the clinical trial. But also, we want you to be able to work with your fellow colleagues across programs, across therapeutic areas, right? So we're going to talk a bit more about how we think about collaboration and how you work together. Thinking about collaborating and working across different programs, different therapeutic areas, different groups within your organization, the single source of truth, the master data that you use is of the utmost importance. So we keep this in mind when we talk about our MEDS, our metadata enterprise data store. When we talk about master data within our platform, we keep the concept of single source of truth always in mind. It's really the important aspect of making sure that we are not overcomplicating, duplicating, and causing more concerns. The fourth piece that we think about, and maybe this is where we move a little bit more technical, but we're thinking of this for you, is scalability. The important thing that we need to do here is make sure that your availability of the system, no matter how many studies you're running, no matter how complex or how many roles you need assigned in that study, that our system can handle it and provide you with the performance that you expect out of your everyday eClinical systems. When I think about scalability, my goal is to make sure that you don't ever have to think about it. You should never be sitting there and watching a wheel spin or an error screen or a downtime. We want to be able to scale in a way where we always are providing you access to the system. And then finally, I think this is top of mind for everybody, is data security and privacy. This is our industry. I don't think I'm shocking anybody of saying that we probably take it to the next level of scrutiny when it comes to data security and privacy, as we are talking about some of the most important information about human beings. So we're about 15 minutes in, and I know that you've been hearing my voice a lot. So I'd like to kind of introduce another one of my colleagues to help us go through this. We're gonna talk about what each one of these means and have a bit of a back and forth. So I'm going to introduce Dan Tuckman, who is a director in our product management group who focuses on the platform along with here at Medidata. And we're going to go through each one of these and give you a bit of an example and talk about how we want to resolve that issue. So I will finally get to take a breath. And hello, Dan. Welcome to our webinar.
Thanks, Jeff, and welcome everyone. And I think going forward, we'll do a little good cop, bad cop, if that works for you, Jeff.
Yes, sir.
So what I'm going to highlight is some examples in real world of what we're actually trying to portray with the core tenets that Jeff has outlined here. So to kick it off, we're going to talk about interoperable. And I know throughout, at your company, some people might use Macs, some people might use PCs. If you're a Mac user, you've gotten this message all too often that an element of Microsoft might not work so well with your Mac computer. I know growing up, when I would type something in Microsoft Office, it never worked on the school Mac systems. This interoperable causes people to think workarounds. And we're seeing that on an everyday basis when you're text messaging people. If you text someone with an Android phone from an iPhone, you get the green bubble versus what you get when you send an iPhone to an iPhone message with the blue bubble. This causes people to think about workarounds. WhatsApp is a workaround. Facebook Messenger is a workaround. But what it really creates is inefficiencies in the system because no longer are you able to share data, communicate the proper channels, and it causes a lot of headaches or people to, create inefficient processes through the system. But what we're looking to do is figure out, Jeff, the good cop, a great interoperable system that really works well together.
Thanks, Dan. And I know that you guys all have dealt with that, and I do too. And to take that point, whether it's the fact that you need to download your Instagram or Facebook pictures to then upload them in Google, or it's that you want a site listing out of your EDC to connect to your CTMS, those are really the things that we're thinking about here. And I think when we take a step back and think about interoperability, we need to think about it in the broadest sense, right? That we're connecting the systems, we're connecting the people, and we're connecting everything in your ecosystem. So when you think about just the systems piece of this, the Rave Clinical Cloud, it's important for us that we have that connection, right? So that we have single sign-on, that is seamlessly integrated into our central administration. So this is all of your roles, assignments, permissions, and you may even do this outside of the system. You may have your own Active Directory. We want to be able to provide access for you to flow your roles into our central administration system. And then you can see that to have that bleed directly into our Rave applications. Whether that user is using CTMS or EDC or eTMF, we want to make sure that those are all interoperable and everything that we feed together is connected up. And that connects into our meds, which is, again, our data store. And then you want to think about your business process and your interoperability across your entire organization. So we are going to have application data that you need to extract and put somewhere else. Business process data, full study extraction. You may have different information that you want to ingest into your system. We need to find a way and have a way for you to take labs data, genomics data, other patient data that's not directly captured within, say, an ePro or EDC, and be able to properly marry that up within your systems. You may even want to connect out to your financial systems. You may want to do resource tracking. So when we think about this, we need to think about interoperability across everything by building out universal APIs, by exposing those to your organizations, by creating data standards that fit into those and giving you that flexibility in what you do on your day-to-day basis. Dan.
Great. So now let's talk a little bit about collaboration. This PowerPoint was not created by one individual. It caused a whole bunch of deck reviews to make sure that we were hitting on the messaging that we're hoping to deliver on this webinar about the core tenets of a platform. But what requires that in the old days was that a whole bunch of us would get together in a room, decide the messaging, someone would take a first shot at that deck, we would review that, and then we would meet again. And what is the age-old thing that happened? Tons of repetitive work. People weren't exactly sure on what they were supposed to be driving, so in that second deck review, we had a whole bunch of missteps or gaps in what we were trying to present. And effectively, now you're on the third deck review, and you're hoping that by then everything works well, but again, you might have another issue going down the line. But in the world of collaboration, it's the idea that whatever Jeff's working on, I'm able to see it in real time and make changes to what's going on. And being able to go to that central area to be able to pull that information, and Google does a fantastic job with this when we use Google Drive to check all the Word documents or spreadsheets or slides to make sure that we're working on this together, where everyone's getting the latest and greatest information so that we can work collaboratively together to ensure that we're executing faster and with better quality. So now, Jeff, would you mind talking about how that happens on the Rave Clinical Cloud?
Yep. And this is the big piece that I was talking about earlier, right? I have spent my career working within this space, and I recognize that we have project management groups that still have to interact with clinical operation groups that are still interacting with data managers, and even many more, right? We have the interactions with site users. We have the interactions with PIs. So we have these many silos, and we have, I remember when we first started building the first platform that I worked on that, we constantly were saying that we needed to find an easier way to beat email and fax, because that is still the way that people are communicating documents and signatures and scanning things in. And it was really an impediment for us to really break down those walls, because you were, let's go back to interoperability, let's talk about collaboration. You were emailing out a document, they were downloading it, signing it, scanning it, sending it back to you. You were downloading it on your end, uploading it into eTMF, making a change in CTMS. And this was all done by an individual that then had to pass that information manually over to another person. If you think of the site startup process, we have a CRA out there doing the initiation visit. We have a project manager who's trying to track the budget on it, and all of this is happening in disparate systems. And that's what we are doing with the Rave Metadata Clinical Cloud here, is breaking down those walls, right? We are thinking about the data, we are thinking about the documentation, but we're also thinking about you, right? The usability is the core component of this. You really want to know about what's on the back end, but when you're actually sitting down on your day-to-day, you just want the system to work, and you want to be able to talk to your colleagues. So that's what we're doing, and the unification of this allows for a CRA to input something into the system that the project manager can also work on, as well as data management, and we're able to have that flow happen seamlessly across those groups. So that's what I'd like to get across here is, my goal when I think about this every day is making your lives easier by being able to work together and to be able to share information quicker, better, faster. So, Dan, I'm going to hand it back over to you for what is the most fun slide in this presentation.
Yeah, and Jeff, thank you. This was one of my favorite slides. I'll be honest, I didn't write this slide. I took it from the internet. But let's go back to our childhood a little bit. And one of my favorite games was telephone, because it was full of laughs. And for the folks on the line that don't know exactly what telephone is, I'm sure if you have children, they might be playing it. But effectively, someone starts with like a sentence, and they whisper it to the person next to them, and the person next to them whispers that same thing that they heard from the first person to the person next to them. And you go around in a circle, and the last person, they say what they think the slogan is based off of what they had heard from the previous person. As you can imagine, when you have a challenge with listening and the whispering, and if people are deciding to mess around with what the sentence is to have some laughs, the message can get very distorted and be challenging to interpret. And when we think about a single source of truth, relating it back to the world of clinical development, expand this to the number of studies that you're all running across the number of different systems that you're using. And now you can really start to think about why your CTMS has 30 plus investigators with the same name in there. And when you're trying to make insights into what's going on with your clinical trials, you're recognizing that distilling that information down is really, really challenging. So Jeff, let's talk about how we can make what the benefits of the single source of truth really are.
Yeah, and I think that more than anything else, it hits home with me. I started my career doing CTMS implementations and really building out process flows around it, and I will tell you that much of the issues that we had was duplications. And I think Dan's story, I actually had a personal experience where we did at one of my former employers have a PI who was in the system, I believe 42 times across multiple studies. And we would spend hours and hours and hours talking just about how to dedupe them. How did we know that the right phone number was going to be captured, or the right degrees for that individual, the right address, including the right loading dock at the university where that site was going to take things on. And so this is a very real thing. I thought the telephone game was actually a fun way to look at that. I'm wondering how long it will be until we forget what telephones really are, but for the time being, I still think that we can use that analogy. But really, this is about standardization, governance, and mastering of data, right? And so we have built our platform around mastering operational data that can be used across our systems. And I think this is a really important piece of work that we've done here, because again, you do think about everybody who is working on this and everybody who is working across your organization. What we're trying to do here is really provide you the ability to create studies, to manage your studies, and to manage your different systems within the study using the same set of data. So when you have completed feasibility and are initiating site startup in CTMS, we want that to push to the EDC immediately as that site is up and running and we have a patient in there. And at the same time, somewhere on the other side of your floor, there's another person starting another similar study in your organization who's going to use that same site or that same PI for another piece of work. And so this is really a driving factor to what we can think about. Now, that's just the front end, right? So now we want to think about what is master data going to do for me on the back end. And what it does is it really allows you to have a much, much better view of what's going on across your organization with certain sites, with certain resources, timelines, process flows, because you're all pulling from a standardized data set. So when we think about reporting out of our clinical cloud, when we think about meds being the driver behind this, it makes your life easier because you're not cutting and pasting, doing a lot of manual workarounds to pull data together. You don't have to go in, pull those 42 investigators into an Excel file, dedupe them yourself, and dump them back in. And that's where we're trying to drive through here, is that you want to standardize and harmonize the data on the front end so it makes it more usable on the back end. So Dan, our next piece here is really talking about scalability. So I love how you get all the fun pictures in this presentation.
Who doesn't like a good dog picture? And I have to assume that many on the line love to participate in Amazon's Prime Day. But last year was a great example of what can happen if your systems can't scale. And what we all saw last year was a whole bunch of dog pictures that basically said Amazon said something went wrong. This lit the internet on fire with a whole bunch of memes going around. Twitter was really highlighting. But besides the cute dog pictures, what this really meant for Amazon was that they took in so much traffic all at the same time that their systems weren't able to handle that additional traffic load. And ultimately, this led to $99 million in estimated lost sales. What does that mean? It created opportunities for competitors to step in and say, hey, we're running the same promotions as Amazon, and our systems do work, and they're able to scale. And so, thinking about the scaling issue is you always want to make sure that your systems are able to handle the workload while your applications do not lose any ability or slow down. So Jeff, back to you.
Yeah, absolutely. So again, I'd like to spend a little time here talking about what we're thinking about. Whether you are running a single study or you are at a large pharma or a large CRO running hundreds or even thousands of studies, we want to make sure that we are able to, again, provide the performance and scalability that goes along with that. So this is a part where we really dive in and think about this. So the first thing, you'll see patients down there, and I wish it was that simple. But really, we think about all of the data elements and the data volume that goes around that, right? So I think we started this presentation by talking about complexity, right? As we've gone from 1, 2s, and 3s endpoints, now we have 10 and 20 with exploratory endpoints as well. Each of those things increases the number of data points that you need to track. More sites means more data that we have to provide in this. Different ingestion of labs, genomics, ePro now, all of those things increase the data volume. So one of the first things that we're working on and are continuing to expand on is ensuring that we are able to provide a cloud-based environment that can handle volume across all of our customers, large and small. So that is really our data volume focus on this. But to be honest, that's not everything. We have to think about usage and performance in the system as well. It's easy to think about volume. We can add servers, we can add cloud, we can always grow that way. But we have to now think about movement of data, changing of data. So when you really think about performance, right? It's one thing to have 5 users with a different role on one study versus having hundreds of users and roles across hundreds of studies. And again, we're talking master data. We make one change and have a cascading effect throughout our systems, right? So we have to keep that in mind. And that's really where we talk about platform performance. And we talk about the SLAs that go around that. And that's a focus of our organization. So we always want to talk about the fun stuff, the features, the enhancements, the collaboration, the single source of truth, and the usability across our users. But this is at core where we come in as a technology company and make sure that we are providing you with the proper amount of volume scalability and performance scalability. And you can see some of the stats there. That's just where we are today, but we see the industry continuing to grow. We know there's going to be more studies, more users, more patients every day. The biggest goal we have in clinical research right now is to get more patients in clinical research, to expand diversity in clinical research, and we can't implement technology that can't handle that growth. So that's why scalability, as you can hear the passion in my voice, is so important to us here at Medidata. And then we have one more of our focus areas that we'll touch point on here.
So we let you down slowly with a little bit of scalability where your system slowed down. But now let's talk about the list you simply can't be on and what this deals with data security and privacy. Here, to no one's surprise, you have some of the largest data breaches of all time, with Yahoo claiming #1. The rest of the list is the 100 million accounts where you've been hacked. Effectively, this creates such disarray within the business. We find out that executives may or may not have known. It creates regulatory insights into what's going on in your business. Put simply, you just can't be on this list. And what you always need to be thinking about is how are we maximizing our data security, data privacy, and data quality and quality management to ensure that that none of your businesses end up on this list. So, Jeff, can you talk to a little bit about how Medidata thinks about this?
Absolutely. This is core to everything that we do. I think I mentioned earlier that when it comes to PHI and we think about the information captured in clinical trials, it is the number one most secure pieces of information that we hold in our life, even over financial data and others. And this is, it's extremely important. It's regulated, and we need to make sure that we provide the guardrails, the safety, the security to make sure that that doesn't happen, right? And there's a couple of things, right? So Dan talked about getting hacked, right? So when we think about data security, we are always focusing, number one, on making sure that we have the best in class, the newest, and everything that we can put behind security around our platform. That prevents us from getting hacked, from users getting into the system. But we also have to think of other things as well, right? So we want to make sure that we have the proper data privacy, right? So this is even within your own organization. This is even within a clinical trial, whether it's blinding or unblinding or providing access to patient data for individuals who may not have that right. We have to make sure that our validated programs that are firewalling and everything we do does not allow the wrong end user access to those data points. You probably, some of you are sitting in Europe as we speak. Some of you in the U.S. are familiar with GDPR and the changes that are going through with all of the privacy issues in Europe. If you are not and you are sitting on the U.S. side of the globe, just go to a European website and you'll see the first thing that pops up is their the disclaimer of the cookies that they're using and making sure that we're not tracking that. We're seeing legislation just like that in the U.S. and on the state level too, right? We know that that's happening within California, Massachusetts, and so we have to maintain a level of keeping our eye on that and making sure that data privacy issues are completely up to the standards and above and beyond, right? Because things will ever be changing, and we need to make sure that we stay out in front of that. And then overall, quality management and having strong QMS and SOPs around this. We do have regulatory and QMS folks who spend every day here making sure that the processes, the way that we deploy, the way that we update our releases is really making sure that there is no impact on your study, right? If we have a release that goes out, we need to make sure that we provide all of the validation, all of the testing, all of the confidence to our customers that the changes that we make in our software don't have an impact on your data, on the quality of your system. So that's really a core part of this. It's never the funnest piece to talk about, but it really is a driving factor in making sure that we don't end up on that list or in the news. Or even worse, what would be the worst part about that is providing the wrong information to the wrong person and hurting an individual who is actually sitting on one of those studies. So we work with all of the different groups and organizations and government agencies to ensure that we are meeting the guidelines above and beyond for each of the groups across multiple regions. That includes Asia, South America, North America, Europe, and many in between. And so that is really a driving force behind what we're trying to do here. So those are the 5 pillars of what we were trying to do here, you know. So just to really close this out, though, we got a little technical. We've got a little bit talking about data security and scalability, but really what I wanted to end my talk on is, again, focusing on why we're doing this, right? And to be honest, as someone who has worked on both the site side and the CRO side of clinical research, I know how hard everybody's day-to-day job can be out there. I've been in your shoes, I've worked with people in your shoes, and really the focus of developing a unified clinical platform, you all, is to make sure that we make your life easier. Every time I give this speech around the office here or talk to individuals, I always talk about the life of a CRA and waking up in the morning and having to jump into a system and get your, what site you're going to and understanding what SDV you need to do that day. Getting off a plane, going to sites, checking boxes, going through binders, scanning, privacy information into your eTMF, getting on a plane and trying to knock out your visit reports on the way home and still be happy and comfortable when you get home so that you can have a life outside of work. And it doesn't always happen right now, and that is the story that I'm trying to solve. I want you to get on Medidata systems in the morning, have that information available through you, following you throughout the day, and really being able to provide you a seamless workflow throughout your day to make your life and your colleagues and your family's life happier. So that is the presentation. We, I think, have about 15 minutes here left at the end to do some Q&A. So I will hand it back to Dania, and we will we'll go to the group.
Thanks, Jeff. So there's still time to submit your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. We have a lot of great questions already, and we'll try to get to as many as possible. All right, so our first question asks, the 5 characteristics you described seem very comprehensive. Based on your experience, is there any one characteristic that you would weigh more heavily than the others, and why?
Oh, that's a great question. As I think through it, I think it's what I was just talking about. If I really had to think about it's collaboration and usability, right? There's a lot of the technical components that we put into this: scalability, security, having master data. But really, when I think about this, I want you and the users to be able to work together and get the best use out of this system. So to me, if I can have a PM, a CL, and a CRA all in the same system at the same time, working from the same set of information, that would be my pick.
That's a great answer. Okay, so our next question asks, what is the difference between Medidata Rave Clinical Cloud and Medidata's Rave application?
Yeah, so that's a great question, right? And when there's lots of names and lots of branding that goes into that. But the Medidata Rave Clinical Cloud is really the ecosystem that we're talking about here. So we have a couple components. If you've ever had the pleasure of going through an application purchase, you will know that there's a lot more that goes into applications than just the application that you're going to get. So when we think about this, when the users on this call, when we think about applications, we're most likely thinking about a CTMS, an EDC, ePro, eConsent, whatever it may be. These are individual applications that are used across a clinical trial. I think SCRS said something along the lines in their last year's survey that a site user has anywhere from 9 to 10 applications on any clinical trial. What we're talking about here doesn't change that, right? We still need an application for each of those process flows. So when we talk then about what is the Medidata Rave Clinical Cloud, that is where we get into having a unified platform, right? That is the master data component that we tie into this. It is the single sign-on, the roles and permissioning, the central administration, all of the things that connect our products together, our applications together. that we are hoping that you guys never have to really think about, right? We want you to have access to meds and be able to store data. We want you to have the scalability and performance. So the Medidata Rave Clinical Cloud is the ecosystem that we work in to allow all of those applications to perform at their best level.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next question asks, what if I'm not able or interested in adopting the entire platform? Can I still benefit from Medidata's unified platform approach?
So the simple, easy answer is yes. And that's what I think we were trying to get across today, and even as a follow-up to the last question. I don't expect that every customer, I don't expect that every sponsor or CRO always needs everything, right? You could be thinking or be sitting at a smaller biotech right now who's only running one study or has one compound. And we need to think about, what you really need in terms of running that study. But when I talked about the Medidata Rave Clinical Cloud, it really is that underneath power that provides, the power to those applications. So you can take on just Rave EDC, and you will still have the quote-unquote platform that goes around that, right? We still have the central administration. We still have the access to meds. These are not things that are going to be taken away because you only have one product. Now, if that one compound does great, or you guys continue to add studies to the program, you continue to grow, and maybe you want something else to go on that, you're already tied into some of those things, right? So I think we went back to the hockey stick graph earlier. There are benefits from using one application, and those benefits just continue to grow and grow and grow as you add other applications to that.
Thank you, Jeff. Our next question is, from what point in clinical trials does metadata enter?
So from what point does, please.
No, sorry, I just wanted to maybe rephrase the way the question was written. So I guess it's asking, at what point does metadata enter clinical trials?
Yep. Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a great question. And I think if you go back and you're thinking about, I had those 5 balls earlier that were talking about the complete component. I look at our set of applications as an end-to-end studied group of study tools, right? So if we are thinking about clinical research, or we're thinking about an individual study, from day one, my expectation is that we have capabilities that can start from, we have protocol designing, we have financial capabilities and grants manager, flowing into study startup, tracking and CTMS, EDC, all the way through database lock. We have tools that can support the closing, the biostatistics, and even the submission to the regulatory agencies. So I truly see this as an end-to-end set of tools that we can work with.
Okay, our next question asks, are there standards metadata follows for importing patient data from external sources?
So yes, so I think if I go back to my slide here, if I'm allowed to jump around, so we follow all of the ISO, GDPR, Privacy Shields, HIPAA, NIST, all of the different components you see here on that certification. I think this is a very good question, because I think something that I brought up earlier is that you are going to be ingesting especially patient data from multiple sources, and they may not live within our metadata ecosystem. And I do mean labs data, I do mean genomic data. There may be other patient data that my mind's just not going to right now, but that is all available. And I work here with our security team, our InfoSec team, and the focus on data privacy and security is the number one thing that we do, and that includes all of these regulatory and guidelines and organizations. but it means that we are keeping up with the most upgraded systems that we work on, the tools that we employ across our company. So we have guidelines, but we also set our own internal regulatory standards that we work to on day-to-day basis, where we feel is above and beyond anything out there on the market.
Okay, so I think you touched on this a bit before with an earlier question, but someone else asks, does the metadata platform work with other companies' applications?
Yes. So that goes back to interoperability 100%. We do work with multiple applications that are not part of metadata. We can integrate with multiple CTMS. We can work across multiple EDC. I don't know any large company that doesn't have probably one or two studies that is not running on Rave, right? We know that there is other EDC providers out there. We would never build a CTMS that can't interact with multiple EDCs. So we recognize that as much as we would like to be every system in your organization, we cannot always be, and we have further examples of us integrating with external SSOs, external eTMF, EDC, other CTMS. So that is something that we regularly do, and if you've been using Rave for the past 20 years that it's been around, you probably have done that with multiple systems over the course of the last couple of decades yourself.
Great. So our next question asks, how challenging is a non-platform approach? Does it really introduce major inefficiencies?
So how challenging is a non-platform approach? So that's what you're doing today, right? I think that we are living in a non-platform approach. It's not really an approach, it's just the current state, if you will. I think we've all kind of gone through this growing together, right? When I first got into this industry, I think a large portion of our studies were still happening on paper data capture, and we've gone through these changes, and I think that we've had that opportunity to learn what worked best with EDC, how we were storing information, content management within eTMF, how to really function in a CTMS world. We've lived on-prem, we've moved to private databases. We are now turning the corner, I think, with the rest of the world on SaaS and cloud. And so I don't really look at it as having to take a platform or a non-platform approach. I just think it's the overall progression of where we go. One of the things that I try to instill the most around here is that I think when we started, not everybody went to work and expected their work systems to interact like their home, internet-enabled things. And the world has changed, right? Like, we now know that every one of our end users most likely has a cell phone in their pocket right now that has them connected to every piece of information they could possibly want in the world. They have browsers, they have social media, they have access to touch screens and nice computers. And we have to remember that we cannot go and provide our end users at a site an experience that doesn't match the real world, right? We have to live up to the expectation of what IoT is doing to the world and how we interact with that. And I think that our sites are going to start demanding that, right? Their lives are hard. I spend every year in Florida at SCRS, and I listen to the feedback, and we run site advocacy groups, and they want this change. They want better, easier systems that they can use their phone, that they can hop online anywhere and log in and know that it's secure. And that's what we're trying to do, right? We need to provide the same level of interaction with our end users that they deal with on a day-to-day basis.
All excellent points. So I think this is another question that you may have touched on earlier. Someone asks, I work with a CRO. Can I still benefit from a unified platform approach?
Absolutely. I think that we look at both of them here. I think maybe I mentioned earlier, my background is from the CRO side. And we have platform users on both sponsors and on the CRO side. Again, I think when you're thinking CRO, that's the real, when you go into the kind of 5 pillars here, that interoperability is a big piece, because you have to be on a platform, but you also have to be able to interact with multiple sponsors, right? You may have a sponsor who wants to use a different EDC. You may have a sponsor who wants to use their CTMS on a study. And those are the things that we need to be flexible with, right? So our platform is purposely interoperable so that we are able to open access, close access, and really provide the interoperability to the other systems. So you can probably guess with my background that I get to work on many of the CRO platforms myself, and I spend a lot of time with this, and we absolutely recommend and like the idea of integrating CROs with other sponsors and having that back and forth. So by no means is there any hurdle that's different for the CRO from a sponsor of taking on a platform approach.
Good to know. Our next question asks, is the full platform presented here available now?
So the full platform presented here is available now. What we think of in terms of the platform, I spent a lot of time on this. We think of kind of 3 core things that means that an application is on the platform. And we talked about a lot of them here, one of them being the master data, the other being the roles and access. And one thing I've touched on but really wasn't in the pillars is the seamless navigation. So when I look at those 3 things and I look at the products that you're using, I think of kind of the large pillars of data management, clinical operations data, and scientific data, and all 3 of those components are on the platform now and can be used today.
Okay, so this will be our last question. We've had a lot of great questions today and couldn't get to them all, but we will try our best to get back to everyone who submitted personally after the webinar. And that last question asks, do you also have the complete compilation of all data from the clinical trial registers?
So I'm hoping I get this question right? So this is the requirements that we have with the likes of a clinicaltrials.gov and also our submission requirements. So what we are building in MEDS, whether or not that information comes from our tools or not, will have the complete encompassing full data set for that clinical trial, whether that's documentation or transactional data points or the master data around operational data. We will capture the NCT. We will make sure that we have the ingestion of any outside data that's not captured as part of the CRF. And so all of that information can be stored within our MEDS data structure. So just to, MEDS again is the enterprise data store that we use underneath of our tools, and we did not build it as in we only need the data from our application. We built it with the entire clinical trial in mind. So yes, what the customer or the user brings in is all available through multiple applications and multiple outside sources to make sure that we have that complete view and is submission ready for our sponsors and our CROs.
Thank you, Jeff. And as we're about to wrap up, I would like to thank you all for attending this Fierce Markets webinar and submitting so many great questions. I'd also like to thank our speakers once again, Jeff and Dan, for participating and Medidata for presenting today's webinar. The webinar has been recorded, so you will be able to access the recording within 24 hours using the same audience link that was sent to you earlier. Thank you all again for joining, and we look forward to seeing you at future events.